Before we begin, I'd like to pay my respects to my teacher, the Most Venerable John May Konsunim. Today's Dhamma talk is on the expansion of Buddhism in Asia, and we shall begin with the reign of King Ashoka from 304 to 232 BCE. At first, King Ashoka was a typical king of his times, very much like we talked about in our last Dhamma talk during the expansion of the various political identities. So he invaded the neighboring kingdom of Kalinga, and this turned into a long and bloody affair. The story goes that afterwards, when he was walking the battlefield and saw the death, destruction, and horror he had actually wrought by beginning the conquest, he became sickened and disillusioned with such warrior activity. Shortly after, King Ashoka converted to Buddhism, and from then on the king decided to conquer ignorance with Dhamma, and consequently he sent out emissaries to the far reaches of the kingdom. We can see this more clearly on the following map. Here we have the kingdom of King Ashoka in the year 250 BCE, dotted along territorial limits. Let's focus our attention to the far left-hand corner of the map, where we'll find a list of the various edicts. Black squares for major rock edicts, black triangles for pillar edicts or stupas, while white squares designated minor rock edicts. Notice the higher density of these edicts along the border. Let's keep in mind, King Ashoka was not only spreading the Dhamma, he was also consolidating his power base. In 247 BCE, King Ashoka sent his son, Mahinda, to Sri Lanka, which is a large island off the coast of India, which we've referred to many times before. And he was successful in a relatively short period of time, as the king of Sri Lanka, Devanampaya, converted to Buddhism. Shortly after, in 240 BCE, Mahinda's sister, the Most Venerable Sanghamitta, arrived with a gift, a cutting from the now famous Bodhi tree. This expansion to Sri Lanka turned out to be critical for Buddhism's survival. Why? Because during the 12th to 16th centuries CE, during the Muslim invasion, Buddhism was almost completely wiped out on the subcontinent. However, the island of Sri Lanka survived the systematic destruction. Now, unbeknownst to the northern region, a fourth council was held in Sri Lanka in 100 BCE. 500 reciters and scribes wrote down the suttas in a language called the Pali language on palm leaves. And this is the first written account of the Pali Canon. Later, interestingly enough, there was a fourth council held in the northern region by the Sarvastivada tradition. We think this occurred about 78 CE in a place called Jalandhar, or present-day Kashmir. The purpose of this council was to organize and systematize their text, and this process took them 12 years. And this is another example of the northern and southern schools developing independently and in a slightly different fashion. Now, the next map I have for you really says it all. And I'm not going to discuss each particular aspect of this very comprehensive map. Rather, I'm going to focus on different processes and events. And because of that, I have sent you a copy of this excellent map as an attachment for your further reference. Isn't this beautiful? Notice the wealth of data presented in terms of the expansion. Points of departure, dates, the various routes, the regions entered, and now the designation of the main schools, Theravada, Mahayana, and later Vajrayana or Tibetan Buddhism. And that brings us to what we call the historical process. Now, as Buddhism expanded into these different regions, it was, of course, adapted to these different cultural, social, political, and economic conditions. Tracing these compounding effects through various countries and through the history of Buddhism is a truly fascinating subject. However, in our case, we're going to restrict ourselves to one scenario, which I think will nicely illustrate this process. As you see, Buddhism's entry into China occurred during the 4th and 5th centuries CE. There, it mixed with Taoism to a large degree, and Confucianism to a smaller degree, not to mention Chinese culture. This mixture then moved into Korea around 372 CE, where it was further influenced by a holistic approach called Dongbulyo, or interpenetrated Buddhism. Then Korean Buddhism, with these other variants, expanded to Japan around 538 to 552 CE, and the process continues. The question then becomes, why did Buddhism, with all of its variants, expand so quickly and so far in a historically relatively short period of time? No doubt there were facilitators such as King Ashoka, the Silk Road, the various oceanic routes, and other various conditions which served as facilitators. However, none of these factors would have mattered had the Dhamma not been sweet. By sweet, we mean it resonated with people. It made sense to people in terms of their life experiences. If the Dhamma had not had a feeling of correctness, of being right, Buddhism may have remained one of the many religious groups existent in the subcontinent at this time. And here is the most magnificent thing, and what we discussed at the very beginning of this course. If you go to any of the various schools of Buddhism today and you ask them, what are your core teachings? You'll find that they're the same. And the explanations of these teachings are pretty much the same. The Buddha stressed the core teachings all through his teaching career. The other thing he did that was absolute genius is he presented us with 1,001 similes. And these similes greatly facilitate our understanding and translators' understandings as to the actual meaning that was being conveyed by the Buddha. Be well, my